In this video, we will look at the for loops that are available to us in Python. So, coming to the first question, what exactly are loops? So, when we try to understand the word loop, in English, we are saying we are trying to do something in a particular process or going over a certain thing over and over again. So in Python also we have a similar meaning. So if we have any kind of iterable, when we go and pass on those particular iterables over and over, that is what are exactly as loops. So coming to for loops, for loop is a kind of loop that is used to go over item by item for any kind of iterable object. So some of the iterable objects that we have already discussed about are lists, tuples, or dictionaries. Okay. So these three are the most frequently used iterables along with the for loop. Okay. So now let's go into a Jupyter notebook and try to understand about this a little better. Okay. So here we have a diagram where there is a block of code, and in the for loop what happens is each item is taken in which is in the sequence is taken in, and here it is checked whether this particular item is it the last element or not. Okay, so if it is the last element, Python is instructed to exit the loop. That means the loop gets complete. Now let's say if it is not the last element. So let's say if it is the first element. So we're just beginning the loop. So if it is not the last element, what happens now is whatever condition or code we have written inside the loop of this particular for loop body, that gets executed. And again, Python has to return back and check whether the next element that is coming in is the element the last element. If it is yes, exits. If it is no, it again executes the exact same code which is present in the for loop. Okay. All right. So let's take a very simple example and try to understand what exactly is for loop doing. For that, I'll take a example of numbers. So I'm going to create a list of numbers, and using that, we will see how exactly is the for loop being executed. So let's say I'm going to create a list called as my numbers, and inside this, let's have the numbers from 1 to 5. Okay, so this is my list of numbers. Now I'm going to take a for loop and I'm going to iterate over every element inside this list. So to do that, we can simply start off with for I in my numbers. So I is a temporary variable, it can be anything. I have just considered as I. You can take just about any variable here, and it's a temporary variable which is allowing us to iterate inside this list. Okay. Now when I hit enter, you can see this, we have entered the code block of for loop. So let's say here we'll do a very simple thing. We are going to print out the element. So let's say I'm just saying print I. So for I in my numbers, we are printing out the number. So what we are actually telling Python is iterate over the entire my numbers list and element by element print it out. So when we run this code, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each number has been printed out. So this particular thing that we have discussed just now of how the for loop is functioning, the exact same thing has happened. So every time it is checking whether this element is the last element. So it will start off with the first number, that is 1 here. So after it sees 1, it is going to ask whether it's the last element. It is not. So it's going to execute the for loop body. So inside the for loop body, we have only one statement, that is print I. So it is going to print 1. And once it prints out, it's going to check for the next element. Similarly, 2, 3, 4 gets printed out. And after the fifth element gets printed out, what is happening is it is going to exit the loop. Okay, so this is how the for loop is performing. Now, let's say, let's try to give a little complexity to this entire thing. So instead of just printing out the numbers, let's say I want to print out the multiple of the numbers, or you could say the factorial. Okay, so what is factorial? Is nothing but the, so in our case this becomes 5 factorial, because 5 factorial is nothing but 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. This is 5 factorial, that is 120. So if we have to perform this kind of thing using these numbers, so let's create a general um, function or a for loop where we'll get finally the value where every number has been multiplied, or in our case this is the 5 factorial. So for that, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to create another dummy variable called my_mul, and I'm going to give it a value of 1. So this is just a dummy variable. We will see where exactly we're going to use this dummy variable. Okay, so we have declared this particular variable. Now we'll start off again with the for loop. So for I in my numbers, the first thing what I'm going to do is take my_mul, and to this we are going to multiply I. Okay, so whatever number it is going to read inside my numbers, it is going to multiply that number with my_mul, which is 1 in the initially we have given the value of 1. So it is, when the for loop begins, this will only be 1. Okay, but after it gets multiplied, we are going to reassign it to my_mul. So every time the loop is running, we would see that the my_mul value has changed. And to make sure of exactly what is happening, let's print it out. Okay, so I'm going to write print, and here I'll say, let's give it a very good statement. Let's simply mention as multiple else, and to this I'll just mention my_mul. But for this to work, I have to actually make it as a f string. So as soon as I write f here, you can see that my_mul is actually going to become a variable. Okay, now if we simply run this, okay, now see what is happening. So every time the number changes, my_mul value is updated. So initially it was, we started off with the number 1. 1 is being multiplied with my_mul, the default value that we had set was 1. So 1 multiplied by 1 is 2. Similarly, 2 multiplied by 1 is 2 again. And 3 multiplied by 2 is 6, because now my_mul has been updating itself with these numbers. So in the end, we see that we get this 120, where we have 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. So that's 5 factorial. So the last entry that we have is updated as 120. Now this my_mul has been having this particular value of 120 inside it. If I have to make a complete check as to has the number been updated properly. Now let's give another print statement, and I'll mention the f string in the beginning itself. Now I will just mention it, the final value is, and inside this I'll pass in my_mul. Okay, so you can see here this particular print statement which is present in the fourth line is outside the for loop. So after this particular set of codes are repeated and the printouts are done, finally there will be one last statement which says the final value is, and my final value whatever it's stored, in this case it's 120, it will be printed as 120. Okay, so now see what has happened. Because we have started off with 120, now this mimer has taken the value of 120 and it has taken those multiples. So to get 120 back, what I'm going to do is redefine mimer as 1. So if I run this and if I run this again, now you can see this is what we had hoped for in the first place. But since I ran this code without resetting the value of my mul, it started with 120. Okay, so here we can see this is how our for loop is functioning.